All right. I think we're all good. Everybody hear everyone okay? Or hear me okay?
Yep, good to go.
Okay.
Sorry
Sorry
about
about
that.
that. Some technical difficulties there. But we are good to go. So this is episode, I forget every time, 55,
Yes, 54, 54.
50,
You're
something like
close.
that, of exit liquidity. And today we have a guest we've actually been trying to get for a while, surprisingly. So thank you for making the time, Ilya. I know it's been a crazy day for sure. So it really means a lot to us that you can spare an hour and come and talk shit with us for a while. I guess to start out, just to kind of like address the elephant in the room real quickly. We're not going to talk about this too much, but would be curious to just hear a little bit about like where your head's at right now re like the outages. Like is are things still kind of crazy on your end? Like have you dealt with this in the past before? Like is this like completely uncharted territory for you?
So I think for Tensor as the protocol, outage doesn't change very much because protocol doesn't carry any risk. We don't have any oracles or anything that could be subject to an economic or liquidity attack. The product that maybe is a little bit more affected is price lock, and that's because price lock has duration. So when somebody enters into a lock, they enter into a lock at least currently for a week, and you could see a hypothetical situation where maybe somebody had exactly 1 hour left in their lock and Solana goes down and they're not able to execute it.
Mm.
I say hypothetical because realistically the lock is live for 7 days. So, 1 or 2 hours, it's unpleasant, but it's not the end of the world. So that's Tensor, the protocol. I think Solana ecosystem as a whole, I guess it's a bittersweet moment. It's sweet in the sense that we haven't had this for a year. It's bitter in the sense that this shouldn't be happening. That said, if you look at uptime of even the most robust and resilient services in the world, which is AWS, it's not 100%. It's 5 nines or whatever. And I think Solana's uptime is actually higher than that.
Mm. Yeah, it's definitely you know, it's interesting because it was like it's been quite an exaggerated issue over the past like, there's been nothing really over the past 15 months or something like that, and it's still a big thing that CT latches onto. So it'll definitely be interesting to see the response over the next couple of days. Okay, that's that. We won't focus too much on that. I would love to hear more about you, a little bit about your background, what kind of brought you to where you're at right now, or specifically to building Tensor.
Yeah. I actually was thinking about crypto deeply a couple of days ago, and because I guess there's like a lot of stuff in this industry that maybe isn't as glamorous or as good as some of the early supporters would hope it would be. Like there's lots of speculation and maybe there's like gambling and stuff like that. But actually, the one thing that is unchanged about crypto and gets back to the reason I got back why I got into it is that it is still the most egalitarian industry in the world, where it literally doesn't matter what background you come from. It doesn't matter if you went to Harvard or you've never went to school. It doesn't matter if you speak the language or you don't. As long as you are smart, you can understand what the market needs and you can build products that people want. You probably have the best shot at changing your life and the life of those people um, that you're close with. And so going back to my story, I was born in Eastern Europe. In Eastern Europe, there's not a lot to do. And I didn't necessarily go to Stanford or some prestigious school that opens a lot of doors. I did work in finance, but I pretty quickly discovered that wasn't my thing. And so I moved back home to live with my folks during COVID. And I was literally back where I started. And it felt bad to kind of be at your computer, age 27 at the time, and like basically thinking to yourself, like, okay, well, here I go again from square zero. Um, and I got into crypto because obviously in front of your computer, that was the industry that was most accessible and where I thought I could do the most damage. And I still think that's true. Basically, I think anybody who like maybe doesn't live in San Francisco or New York or London and wants to do a lot of damage should probably go into crypto. So yeah, I guess that's my story, and I don't know, some thoughts on crypto.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I think that definitely resonates. The idea of like a true like meritocratic system where really all that matters is the value you can provide is I don't know if I don't know many people who got into crypto solely because of that, but I do know a lot of people stayed solely because of that. So that's really valuable. I am specifically regarding your background in history. One of the questions we ask all of our guests, kind of the cost of tuition in crypto is being exit liquidity at some point. Um, we would like to hear some of your most memorable stories of when you were exit liquidity in this industry.
Yeah, the one that I'm most proud of is when I bought Cope at probably 5 or 6 with a stupid amount of money and rode it all the way to I don't know wherever higher it went, like another 10%, and then all the way to zero. And yeah, I guess Siri didn't save us, so that was mine.
Yeah, that's a solid one. Been doing some like I've been late to this whole ecosystem in general, but Tensor really comes off as kind of like an underdog story in a sense. I really like that about kind of researching you guys. What brought you guys into such a competitive space? Like a few years ago or a year, 2 years ago, there was so much competition. There was OpenSea taking over everything. Um, what was your North Star from the beginning?
Yeah, I think in terms of what brought us in, probably naivete. I think knowing everything I know now, probably wouldn't get into it. But back then, we actually naively assumed that we were not competitive with any of the existing NFT marketplaces because we thought we were going after a different audience, the pro traders. And I think what we learned as the deeper we got was that there were no pro traders. There were just traders and there were collectors. And actually, uh, even the existing marketplaces were kind of serving traders more than they were serving collectors. So I guess that was the kind of the key insight that we understood pretty quickly. Now, the other thing we understood was that yes, there were traders, there were collectors, but the existing marketplaces didn't really serve traders that well. Like it was okay, but it wasn't like blow away, right? And so we built a product that we thought would be blow away. Back then it was real time. We were one of the first to have collection wide bids. It was like a huge novelty back then to have like bid side liquidity for NFTs. We built something that had charts and that looked more like Bloomberg than it did like eBay. And I think traders like that. I think we sort of read the market correctly at the time that most people cared for those features more than they cared for large pictures. And so that was that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think this is like Bloomberg comparison kind of really helps put into perspective what mm, most NFT marketplaces look like a couple years ago and what, some of the big ones still look like now without naming any names. Um, was there any when you guys started building, obviously by now you have a number of different products. There's the price lock, there's market making, there's the whole bidding and listing system, which I think is fairly unique to Tensor. It's not something I've seen anywhere else. Um, this was all of these kind of developed over time. Were there any that kind of stood out to you, or in the future, maybe something you're like thinking about building in the longer run that kind of stands out as like a killer feature? Tensor in itself is a very complete product, I find it to be, but I'm wondering if there's any one feature that stood out to you in the building process.
Features that we already built or features that we want to build?
Let's do both. Let's do one you've already built and one you want to build.
I think price lock was probably the one that to me is the most exciting out of the stuff that we built because it's just so unique. It's like a different spin on existing financial primitives in TradFi, but we didn't copy it pixel per pixel or like idea for idea because it doesn't make sense. Like NFTs is a new asset class. You need to be thinking from first principles. And I think we put a lot of thought into that product, and it probably took like 10 20 UX iterations where we like pretty seriously changed the design to get it to a point where it is today, that at least what users are telling us is that it's fairly easy to understand, fairly intuitive. It's not too complicated. I think saying that for a product like Price Lock is like the highest praise, at least to me. And I still think we can make it simpler, but pretty happy with the first version. In terms of what we want to build, I think it's actually pretty simple. We got into NFTs in the beginning with Richard because we felt that basically you can take the financial system and divide it into halves, you know, the fungible, non-fungible, not saying anything insightful here. And but the interesting thing is there's like 100 smart, hungry teams in DeFi, and there's like 3 in NFTs, at least at the time, right? And so as a founder, you're looking for these arbitrage moments where you see the opportunity that most don't. And so for us, that was the most obvious thing that we saw, which is like half the world's finance is going to run on these NFT financialization rails, and there's nobody really thinking deeply and trying seriously to build them. And we thought that we should do it. And that has been our North Star ever since we started this company and continues to be every day. This year is going to be big for us because we're going to decentralize and open source all of our protocols and incentivize other developers to build on top of us. And so the answer to what's exciting that's coming, it's exactly that. It's basically building out a shared liquidity layer that anybody can tap into.
Interesting. I wanted to take a step back. You were talking about the development of Price Lock. Could you break down how you guys have built Price Lock and the mechanisms inside of it?
Sure. So at a high level, traders asked for 2 things that we didn't have at the time, and that was capital efficiency and the ability to hedge. Both are pretty common in TradFi, but didn't exist in NFTs. And PriceLock solves those 2 problems because with very little capital, as little as, let's say, 5 SOL, you can make a directional bet on a collection for a week, and an expensive collection, like 200 SOL collection, like Mad Lads. And if you want to do something cheaper, like 10 SOL collection, that's going to cost you like 0.3, 0.2 SOL. So it's pretty cheap. And basically, the way we thought about PriceLock was how do we deliver those 2 things with as little mental overhead? Like, so the user doesn't have to think about like 15 dimensions of complexity. And so what we've done is we've collapsed all of the dimensions except for one. Specifically, the user doesn't get to choose duration. The user also doesn't get to choose the percentage fee that they will be paying for a lock. The only thing that the user gets to choose is what is the price of the lock that they're accepting or funding. That's it. And that makes it really simple because it actually makes it very similar to lending, where there's only one dimension that both the lender and the borrower think about, and that is what is the size of the loan. And everything else is kind of decided for them. And we're not saying this is the most efficient model, anything but at this point in market cycle where there's like, given the kind of market participants we have, given the size of the market we have, given the liquidity in collections, we think this is the optimal product.
Yeah. I think we've spent a lot of time talking to NFT finance projects. Like, man, that must have been like close to a year ago now. But back when a lot of them were in their early stages trying out different things. And we saw a lot of different like models towards derivatives, or just different ways to expose yourself to price action for NFTs without needing to hold them, and for a counterparty to earn yield for doing so. What made you guys go with price lock specifically versus something like, I don't know how familiar you are with the NFT finance space on Ethereum, but like something like NFT perp, which is like backed perpetual futures, versus Wasabi, which is leveraged spot trading, versus like a more TradFi kind of approach to options. So like price lock is obviously very similar to options, but you guys market it very differently. I think it's a lot easier to approach for an average user. Whereas like, we had guys like Hook and like Wasabi who are trying to offer more finance native options. What made you guys settle on price lock specifically as like as your derivatives piece?
It's basically the state of the market where we don't think the market is liquid enough right now to support perps, because it would be too easy to take advantage of them by moving the market and getting away on a 10x leverage, long or short. For options, like raw options is basically too complicated for NFTs. Most of the traders don't come from a financial background, and putting a primitive like that in front of them is just a lot to ask. So yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it was like a process of thinking from first principles and figuring out what we think the current users are going to be happy with.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I guess like I I was always interested in the pure options approach, but I really didn't know how I felt about it. But I guess that is a good point that like, NFT traders and options traders is like a very two very separate user groups. I'm wondering, this is like a little bit off topic, but I'm wondering if you've been paying attention to like the ERC 404 stuff, like the fungible NFTs. Basically, like a gross oversimplification is it's not even like a token standard specifically. It's just a token contract where users can purchase fungible tokens up to a fraction of some amount, and if they purchase a full one, it mints that NFT to their account. And when they transfer it, it only moves the NFT if you move one full token. So you can fractionalize it. You can like have liquidity for it on an AMM on like Uniswap, and the NFT burns and mints to the transferred address anytime you sell or swap a full token. Have you been reading about that at all? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So I guess my general thoughts on fractionalization is that most of the time it's unnecessary. It's actually a pretty complicated mechanism that only makes sense when you have a very expensive NFT. So something like a Grail Punk or maybe a Boogle, like something like that. I could see people wanting to fractionalize to get exposure, but for everything else, it's too complicated. Like, why would you want to take something that is a single transaction for a user to buy or sell, especially in Solana, where most NFTs are, super cheap, and then turn that into 1,000 different actions? It just makes UX really clunky, and I think that's why all fractionalization attempts to date have basically not really had product market fit. They had like some initial traction, but it always died down.
Yeah, I think fractionalization has been uh, attempted previously. I think Ali's got someone at his door, but it's been attempted before. Could you? But I wanted to roll back the tape a little bit and discuss kind of your guys' journey on Solana in general. I'm sure there's a point where you kind of make that decision to commit to a chain, an ecosystem. What was that process like for you guys?
Yeah, I think early on it seemed to us that Solana was unfairly overlooked because there was like really interesting tech and not enough smart teams trying. Kind of going back to what I said earlier. Now, obviously, along the way, it was a bumpy ride, and there was definitely a couple of moments when we sat down and sort of looked each other in the face and asked ourselves the question of like, "Hey, was this a mistake? Did we pick the wrong course?" And at times it seemed yes, but it also seemed like now we picked it, so we might as well finish what we started, and just kind of keep building. And so we just kept building. And honestly, like I think the thing that kept us going was that we had users that kept telling us that they liked the product. I think that's like a very strong signal for a founder that you're onto something. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you're onto a big business, because you might have 50 guys that like your product and the entire market size is 50 guys, and that's it. But at least it means that you're onto something. And so it's worth exploring it a bit further rather than, saying, okay, well, let's start from scratch and going back to square zero. So yeah, I think that's kind of how we thought about it.
Yeah, that I think that moment it can be described in like some of the price action when Sol was sitting at like sub $10 and everyone was doubting, including myself. Ali kind of saved the podcast reputation by bull posting Solana throughout that time. But what was like partnerships? What was the general vibe amongst developers? Do you have kind of like some pros and cons of what those conditions kind of built as they've happened, looking back at them?
I think developers were actually the group that seemed least phased by Solana being at $8. At least I remember being in a bunch of discords and Telegram groups with other devs, and people kind of didn't really talk about the price. And I think that was like another signal that gave us confidence that there was enough people there that weren't going to just leave at the first sign of like issues. Um, but I'd also be lying if I said like it wasn't, it wasn't like a psychological like burden or something, because it's funny. It's actually not the price being at $8 that is shit. It's the price going lower and lower every day because you just don't know where the floor is. And at some point, you fundamentally start to like question the universe. You're like, okay, well, if this actually goes to zero, like how much of an idiot am I for believing in this? And I guess that's maybe like a meta point. That's like the founder's journey in a nutshell. You're never stable. You're never like in normal mood. You're like constantly oscillating between I'm a genius and I'm going to change the world to I'm an idiot and like I don't even know what I'm doing here. So yeah, you may spend more time in the second bucket than the first. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I think it's definitely benefited a lot of the developer community. I think one of the things that I had criticism for the ecosystem early on was there wasn't a cypherpunk kind of ethos surrounding some of the projects on Solana, or like the people talking about it. And now I feel like I've kind of observed and appreciated the, I guess, fire that developers were forged in building in that ecosystem at that time, but also just the true and like raw need for speed and like UX developments. Could you speak on like the importance of those features in Solana versus other ecosystems that kind of formulated your decision early on?
Yeah, I think the person that puts it the best is our investor, Chris Berniski. We got a lot of inspiration from him and learned a lot from him. And one thing he said early on was on one of the podcasts, actually, I think he said Solana isn't better than Ethereum, nor is it worse. It's just different. Like Ethereum attracts a certain crowd of people that have certain, almost mental requirements where for them maybe decentralization is the number one priority and they're more idealists. Solana attracts people who are more UX maxis and who care about performance, who care about building smooth apps. And those people are not worse, or they're just different, right? Like, and that's okay. It's okay to have products that cater to different preferences. In fact, that's how markets typically work out, where you have like Android on one hand and then Apple, obviously very polar philosophies. It's a long-winded way of saying that Solana just prioritizes other things, but things that matter to a lot of people. And I guess like us included, where we came from TradFi and we felt that we had to build products that matched TradFi in speed and efficiency. Now, this is probably the worst day of the year to be saying that because Solana was down, but I don't know. There you go. I said it. And I think it's going to be fine. Whatever issue there is, it's going to be recovered from. Solana's engineering team is probably one of the best on planet.
Yeah, I think it's definitely in a better direction. So I think like seeing that improvement is something people should definitely appreciate and take into consideration. I wanted to touch a little bit more on kind of Tensor's journey. Could you break that down from a high level of how the NFT is involved, how Tensorians are involved, where the product has kind of developed, and where you are today?
Yeah, so we started off as an aggregator. We actually didn't want to build our own marketplace initially. Then one really large and I'll just leave it at that. One very large marketplace pulled our API key, and we had to basically build our own marketplace, right? Because we didn't have liquidity, we couldn't aggregate anymore. And then we built an AMM, and for the longest time, we didn't have a lot of liquidity, didn't have a lot of users, but we kept shipping features, kept building interesting stuff, doing partnerships, and I think eventually at some point we started getting like real volume. That was crazy. I think like every founder has a moment in their company when they just can't believe the stuff that's going on. And it's funny, but it's those moments are a lot more impactful early on when you maybe see your first one user or your first 100 users like that, almost like your hands are shaking. You like can't believe somebody cares. When you have like 100,000 users and you go to 1 million users, that's like nice, but it doesn't feel the same way. Even though like in absolute numbers, it actually sort of matters a lot more. But I think like that was probably the moment when I was just looking at the screen and we went from 0% market share to 10, and I couldn't believe my eyes. I was like, there's no way this is happening. Like you literally could not believe it. So that was super cool. I think those are the moments that founders live for. Yeah, so that was pivotal for us. And then once we started having real users, what became pretty obvious was that our segmentation of the market into pros and not was not correct, probably not the best, and that we had to simplify the product. And so we pretty quickly added a lot of features that like other marketplaces had, and we added a light mode that would hide a lot of the complexity. Yeah, and I guess like the irony is that after that we added a product that's more complicated, but that's kind of what the market is, right? Like you just move with the market and ship what people want.
Yeah, I think Tensor does a really good job of that specifically. I mean, even though I maybe have not been like the most active on Solana, like earlier when things were bad, I've always told Cito this, and I think I've said this on pod before, that Tensor is like for me at least, it's the best NFT marketplace in crypto. And I think that the only way you can really like just using it is the best way. Like Cito asked me why, and I'm like, dude, just use it. Like it's the customizability and the depth you can have is just like not matched. Kind of like tangentially related to that, you talked about like Tensor serving as in the future, at least in the long run, the vision is kind of to be this liquidity layer for NFTs. And you talked about different teams building on top of it. I'm curious as to like what kind of products you envision other teams coming in and building on top of Tensor. Like if there's a prospective dev watching this or a prospective founder, like what are some ideas you would encourage them to explore?
Yeah, I think NFTs are really cool compared to normal fungible tokens in that the diversity of their form factor is almost unlimited. So you can literally have, an NFT that changes itself 17 times a day and is attached to some like silly game sitting next to a real estate deed that like maybe trades once in 3 years or maybe once in 30 years. I don't know. Sitting next to a whiskey bottle, sitting next to a ticket to, I don't know, pick your favorite artist event, right? Isn't that crazy? That's like these things, it doesn't even make sense to categorize them together. And so then the question becomes like, well, how do you build a product for an asset class this diverse? And the answer is you don't, because that's crazy. You can't build a single UI that caters to all of this. Instead, what you build is an infrastructure layer that other developers that understand their niches way better than you can build on top of. And so if you're Baxis and you're all about whiskey and making sure the whiskey market 10x's from here, and you really understand your audience, then you should go or use our infra and build your own vertical marketplace sitting on top of our protocols, collect the fees for yourself, serve your users, right? We'll put the power of our community behind you to make you successful, and everybody wins. We win because we have another awesome app built on top of us. You win because you completely control the experience. You don't need to ask Tensor devs to add a filter for, whatever strength of whiskey or something. You just do it yourself. And then equally, somebody like Backpack, right? Like they have their own experience built on top of Tensor. Dialect, which is basically trading via messages, has their own experience built on top of Tensor. And then games, right? Like let's say your portals and you want to have like an inventory inside the game where you want to trade NFTs. Well, again, we can power all of that. And that's the grand vision for Tensor. That's what got for sure me excited on day one is building the trading rails for this infinitely diverse and infinitely large asset class.
Yeah. You're talking about kind of, I'm starting to see the vision a lot more through that. That was a very good answer. What else has to be built for that to become a reality in your mind from Tensor's end? What is like the must-haves that you think these founders and future developers that will build on top of Tensor might need?
Yeah, it's funny because every time we have a conversation with somebody about like the vision, people always ask us like, what is left to build? Like you guys already have a product. And then like a year down the line or 6 months down the line, we once again showed them the product, and they're like, well, what is left to build? And we're like, holy shit, you have no idea. But yeah, I guess the answer is like a lot, because right now the protocols are pretty thin. They can do pretty basic stuff. There's a lot of advanced functionality missing. But probably more importantly, NFTs in particular is a very data hungry asset class. What I mean by that is, to support a token front end, you actually don't need a lot of data. Just a few WebSockets and maybe a couple pairs here, because it's by definition fungible. So you have like the name and the icon, and that's all the data you need. But NFTs is the opposite of that, where every single item you need to supply the metadata for, which means that you need a really fast, performant backend to ingest all of that data from the blockchain, store it, cache it, probably cache it another 4 times because it's just so much stuff, and then deliver it to the API user, right? And so for us, when we're thinking about building a developer experience for Tensor, it's not just about, can you put limit orders on the protocol, even though that's important. It's also about, can we give you a fast backend that can help you bootstrap your product with, I don't know, a single dev, right? And we actually think that right now, at a point where right now, probably the answer is yes. Like, if you're a capable dev, you can use our API to basically build your front end for whiskey bottles or whatever is your favorite NFT class. And it's gonna be kind of pretty cool. And it's gonna be as fast as Tensor the app, right? Because we've put so much work into the back end. But I think like scaling that to millions of users and making sure that the entire world can rely on that infrastructure, and maybe having partners that support different variations of those backends in different regions, man, that's like years, if not decades of work.
Yeah, that's like the type of stuff that like gets people like really excited and like passionate and like into crypto in the first place. That's like long-term vision. Like, I'm going to join this space so I can build towards a goal like that. I really like that. That's kind of long-term, always in the back of mind. What about outside of NFTs? I know Flash Trade. I'm not exactly sure what the relationship is between Tensor and Flash Trade, but I know Flash Trade is a perpetual futures dex. I think there's crypto as well as some like gold and precious metals stuff like that on there. Maybe some forex. Is there any other like non NFT related use cases that you could see Tensor intersecting with in the future?
Yeah, I think for us, we definitely know we don't want to go into fungible tokens because there's just too many smart teams competing. I think the NFT space is very diverse, and there's a lot of really interesting pockets of opportunity. Inscriptions is one interesting pocket. A lot of the stuff that's been happening lately with some of the new standards around Token 22 is pretty interesting. Now, I don't know if we're going to capture all of them. We're a pretty small team, and we kind of have to pick our battles pretty carefully. But yeah, I think it's kind of case by case basis, like choosing what you attack and what you don't attack.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Just like taking a step back, I realized I wanted to ask this earlier, but I forgot to. Going back to like Tensor's earlier days and kind of your vision when you were building it and your vision now even, are there any like shout outs you can give to products you look to for inspiration, teams who you think did something really, really well that maybe found its way into the thought process when designing Tensor?
Yeah, if you look at our UI, and actually if you pull up a second screen and you open any centralized exchange product, you'll probably see a lot of similarity. And our UI is definitely more similar to a SEX than it is to like a eBay or like a OpenSea. And by the way, I'm not saying we're a SEX. I'm saying that we're a decentralized protocol. It's just that we look and feel like one, because that's the target audience we're going after. And so obviously you'll see a lot of maybe inspiration from your FTXs and Binances and Coinbases, and maybe even something like DYDX, which I think is a really cool product. And at the same time, so Tensor lets you do this really funny thing where you can like really zoom out of the market, and you can kind of look at the market at a glance. Like, you can minimize the listings, you can see the chart, you can see the order book, and then you can really zoom in, like really zoom in. Like, you get to see the NFT in detail, you get to see the traits in detail, can filter by trades, you can like do all kinds of cool stuff. And that's very intentional because this is a market that different traders trade different ways. Some people trade very macro, like they will trade the floor. Other people dive in and pick out specific attributes. I think that's what makes it fun. So yeah, like I think our product is like one of you were saying before, is like very configurable. Very, it's like stretches a lot. I think that's part of the power.
Yeah, I think the comparison to a sex is a good one. I think that's like probably the best user experience in crypto. I mean, unless you lose all your funds, but user experience wise, that's probably one of the best. Uh, Tensor, the protocol, has a lot of things on its roadmap. You guys are in the middle of point system. There's other aspects. You described the aggregation journey. I wasn't there for it, so I want to kind of hear a bit of how the NFTs got involved, how the Tensorian NFTs came about. What was that process like? Because I watched some of the live streams, and in hindsight, it seems like you guys signed yourself up for like two projects at the same time, launching a collection in terms of like stress levels. Could you describe how it came about and how you feel about it now?
Yeah, it started with a blog post by Chris Dixon where he talks about 1,000 true fans and how 1,000 true fans can enable a project to go above and beyond anything that the project could do before. And that's because typically, if you build something magical, something people like, there's going to be a handful of people that become like diehards and they really want to associate with your project in like much deeper ways than just opening up the UI and clicking a button. And so Tensorians was our way of letting people do that. It's a utility NFT that lets people get more out of the product. So, for example, you get better multipliers on your trading, you get access to new features, you get free airdrops from our partners because we constantly snapshot staked Tensorians. You also get referrals, right? So once you own a Tensorian, you're able to refer people to use Tensor. And so like all of those features, we've sort of like enabling, you can still use the product without them. The product is great without them. But if you really want to go that one extra mile, then you get a Tensorian and you become part of the club. And obviously there's also the Tensorians chat. And it seems like it's a small thing, but it's actually not, because Richard and me will read that chat religiously every day while we don't really have time to read general. And so like if you want the team's full attention, like you just buy a Tensorian and you post there and you'll get a reply. So it's really that simple. We didn't try to mid-curve it. That's all the NFT does. It's just a way for you to be closer to the project, closer to the team, get a little bit more out of the product. And super proud of how it panned out.
Yeah, it's definitely been a simple yet effective approach so far. I recently, well, I think like within the past month or so, I finally got around to grabbing one. Also, like worth highlighting because I didn't know about this, and no one else I knew who is a holder mentioned this to me. But the giveaways are also sweet. Like you guys do a lot of good whitelist and presale giveaways on Discord for Tensorians. I still kind of kick myself for like knowing these things existed for so long, like seeing them at like 6 SOL or whatever in November, and then just continually fading it before buying one at like 60 or whatever it was. But you live and you learn, I think. I also think that obviously with the way that incentives have been structured, the idea of like the core user group, the core 1,000 users, really elevating your product, like just with everything kind of working together well and throwing fuel on the fire of an already good product, has had just a fantastic effect, and I think we still have yet to see a lot of it. Talking a little bit more about the points themselves, obviously Tensor has gotten a lot more attention on season 3, but I think a lot of people don't really know what was going on in seasons 1 and 2 and kind of how those turned out. Can you talk a little bit about the history of the points program, how it's gotten to where it is today?
Yeah, so points, everybody's favorite topic these days. For sure. We recently moved the entire team to salary points instead of salary, so everybody's really happy. But yeah, so I guess we sort of tried points like ages ago, like over a year ago, and back then it was like novel and new. Obviously now it's not. And the first two seasons kind of culminated in Tensorians, and so people that accumulated a lot of points basically got free NFTs, like that simple. And also the other cool thing was we got a lot of partner collections involved. So when, for example, season 2 ended, we basically had like, a Mad Lad to give out, a Klano to give out, like, Acid Dash gave us a bunch of NFTs. That was really cool. So, and all that went to points holders for completely free, just for using the product. So that was kind of season 1 and 2. Season 3 is our biggest season, probably most important as well. And that's going to be ending soon. The one thing that's different about season 3 versus 1 and 2 is that we don't show the user their points intentionally. It's funny how we're about points, but we don't show them. And that's because we don't want people to be gaming the system too badly. That's also why the leaderboard only updates once a week rather than in real time, even though the tech supports it. And again, that's just because we don't want people to abuse the system.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, we've definitely seen like even with all the different mechanisms in place to kind of protect the system from bad actors, we still had things like soul maps happen, which was uh kind of funny from my perspective, I feel like. But at the same time, like especially when you have users who've been around since season 1 using this thing like to allow people to come in and just absolutely like trash their points with dilution. Is it's a difficult thing to like balance, definitely. um Kind of related to that as well, and something you touched based on earlier, you mentioned that you guys would be decentralizing the protocol this year. I don't think that there is a, at least if there is, it's probably not a very big one. I don't think that there is a bigger NFT marketplace that is decentralized or making a concentrated effort to be that way. Like Looks and Blur both have tokens, obviously, but they're just tokens, not much more than that, as far as I know. Um, how are you guys thinking about governance specifically? Like, are there any models out there that you're looking at that you think would be particularly effective for Tensor? Just because we really don't have a lot of data as to like what's worked for governing NFT marketplaces. And by now Tensor is so much more than that as well. So I'm curious to hear if you guys are thinking about any governance frameworks.
Yeah, I think you guys will have to wait a little bit for that. I'm not sure there's anything I can share right now.
Oh man. Damn, that's a shame.
Sorry.
Like
Fair,
token aside,
fair.
just like decision making, anything in that regard?
We had
I think
we had Margin, Anders from Margin. He not into reference. He just randomly thought about it around the time that we asked this question. He described Futarchy as a governance model that he liked. So yeah, completely aside from Tensor, just if there was any kind of governance model that you would feel like is cool. Totally understandable if you can't answer.
Well, I think just generally on governance, I would say that the job that most protocols have is to find a model that is both inclusive, but also, I would say, decisive enough where you want to be able to make decisions in one direction or another fast, and ideally not have not be burdened by unfunctional governance. And that's really hard to achieve. I actually think representative democracy, which is what the West mainly has in actual countries, is probably the right model where you have holders that select some council and that council makes decisions. I think that makes a lot of sense because then you don't have somebody who is completely unqualified, but happens to have a big bag having a big weight. But I don't know. I think this is like a super complicated topic, and there are people way smarter than me that think about these things way deeper than me. I think it'll take a couple of years for crypto to figure out what works.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely like not anywhere near perfect. I mean, a lot of the governance models out there are kind of a mess, or maybe not the models themselves, but the inputs to them. It is one, at least for me, it is one of the more like fascinating topics just because it's still like so unsolved, like a lot more so than some of the other ones. It's not really being used to the fullest of its potential, I think. So I'm always interested to hear how teams are thinking about their own processes with regards to decision making and governance. I think we're a little weird on time here, I know, because we had the delayed start. But we're gonna get ready to wrap up here. I just wanted to give you a second in case there was any last things you wanted to highlight, anything you think that our users should know about you or about Tensor, any closing remarks or anything of that nature?
Yeah, I'd just say that I think the Solana NFT ecosystem is going to become a lot more diverse and interesting in the coming years. We're seeing way more experience with standards and approaches on Solana that we've seen on any other blockchain. And that is because it's both fast and cheap. And also because I think Solana community has the right mindset currently of experimentation and trying new things. And so I'm personally like super excited for it. I think the next years will be very formative. So yeah, stick around. I think it'll be fun.
Definitely. Yeah. I think one of my hotter takes as someone who's more active in EVM ecosystems than Solana is that people always talk about like NFTs making a revival, and I don't know that that happens on the EVM. Whether it happens on Solana is more likely, I think. Even Bitcoin, I think you can make a better case, but there's definitely like more interesting ecosystems to be paying attention to, I think, rather than, you know, the one that was already established, or the one that is kind of been on a bit of a downslide. Cool. Yeah, great insight. Definitely agree with that. I think that's probably a good spot to wrap things up. I really appreciate you taking the time. This was a ton of fun. Definitely, you know, been a Tensor user for a while. Definitely not gonna let up now. Yeah,
Ollie
looking
was the
forward
one
to.
gaming the system, by the way. He's the one that you guys are having to
That
fight
explains
against.
everything. Why you guys are asking so many detailed questions.
Listen, man, I'm just a humble farmer over here. I just like my points.
Yeah, doing my it's not a lot, but it's honest work, right?
Yeah, exactly. It ain't much, but it's honest work.
Exactly.
I'm just a humble NFT trader. We can say that.
All right, that's it. That's episode 54. Appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks, guys.